Hello YouTubers. Okay, I am going to attempt to do 6 vocab words. I got it. 6 vocab words here in this final video. And the first 2 vocab words have to do with politics in Tang Sung era China. The second 2 vocab words have to do with economics and the economy in Tang Sung China. And then the final words have to do with social and cultural aspects of Chinese life during this time period. So it's time to take a deep breath and get started on these words. The first one is going to be the Ministry of Rites. And the Ministry of Rites was simply the Ministry of Education and Testing for Tang and Sung era China. So the government had come to rely on, again, more of a Confucian-based examination system, and this examination system was expanded. The Ministry of Rites was responsible for the examinations of kids, young boys, young men, who were hoping to enter into the Chinese bureaucracy, and they would administer all sorts of tests depending on what this particular kid or student was going for. So this represented the expansion of the bureaucracy and the examination system. It was, again, still open to anybody with talent or merit, but birth, who your family was, definitely played a huge part in who was achieving the highest levels of education. Oftentimes the rich and elite, ensuring that their children were able to take their positions of authority once they were done. So there's the Ministry of Rites. The second word is Neo-Confucian, and Neo-Confucian philosophers were ones during the Tang and Sung era, mainly the Sung era, who once again promoted Confucianism as the main philosophy for China. Neo meaning new, Confucian meaning of Confucius. So these Neo-Confucians were responsible for pushing out any other competing philosophies, most prominently Buddhism, which had risen to power in some degree, and promoting the idea that Confucian philosophy was the end-all, the very best type of philosophy in order to achieve moral, ethical satisfaction in life and a peaceful society. So that is the significance of the Neo-Confucians. The second 2 words that we're going to look at have to do with Chinese economy and trade during this time period, and the first one is the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal was a system of canals which connected the north and south of China for trade and commerce. So that's the basic definition. What's the significance? So what? Well, China had river systems which ran from the east to west, which were fairly reliable, but they did not have one that ran from north to south. And so this was put in place because the south was a new area of settlement for the Chinese. The north was kind of the old area of settlement and center of industry. But in the south was also the grain growing region of China. So this is where all the food came from. So they could certainly trade it by taking roads from the north to south. That wasn't too difficult. But if you put a huge load onto a cart, it's much more difficult to move it on wheels by pulling it with animals than it is simply to load it all onto a barge and stick it on the river or a canal and float it. And so in order to float that, it was a grand scale architectural design in order to connect the north and the south of China for trade and economics. The second trade and economic word is junks, and junks were simply these gigantic treasure ships, and you have an awesome picture of a junk to show the scale of it on page 270 in your textbook. There it is. I don't know if you can actually see that or not, but I hope you can. It's huge. These are over 400-foot boats, ships, that basically dwarf anything else that's in the water of the Indian Ocean and definitely east of the Malay Peninsula. And so the Chinese were able to dominate in merchant activity by filling these boats and bringing them back to China. So that was kind of the significance of them. The definition is they're just huge Chinese treasure ships for trade. The significance is they allowed the Chinese to dominate commercial activity within the Indian Ocean Trade Network. Interestingly, though, the Chinese would eventually kind of call these ships back, and that has to do with a couple things. First, their disdain of merchant activity in general, and then also the fact that they're fairly ethnocentric and said if people want our stuff, they can come to us. And the second economic word, we already did the two economic words, I'm sorry, Grand Canal and junks. So the two that are social cultural words are footbinding and then Li Bo, who was a poet. So footbinding we discussed a little bit in class, but footbinding is simply a practice of making women's feet small by binding them from a young age and essentially making them grow in a deformed way so that they could fit into tiny shoes. So what? Well, first, a lot of questions come up about footbinding. Why did they do it and who did it? It was primarily and almost exclusively an elite practice. Commoners wouldn't do this because commoners had to walk and go out and do chores, and footbinding essentially made it so that the woman was confined to the household because it was difficult, if not impossible, to walk with bound feet. It was incredibly painful. And so women would do this. Why would they do this? They did this in order to, usually to secure a good marriage. An elite man was supposedly highly attracted to small feet, whether or not that's true or not. I mean, I've seen these foot-bound feet, and I'm not especially attracted, but this is a cultural thing where if this was what was seen as attractive, the woman would go to great lengths to do it. And so the idea is this is similar to any other cultural practice where somebody is manipulating or changing their body in dramatic ways in order to fit in or gain some sort of advantage. So elite women were able to show off their status by being foot-bound, and they were also able to secure a good marriage. They weren't able, though, to walk very well. And I don't know, probably not swim either, because those are difficult feat for walking or swimming. All right, and then the last word is Li Bo, and Li Bo was a poet in the Song era, and kind of so that's what the basic definition was. One of the most famous poets who wrote about nature poems quite a bit, but more significantly, Li Bo represented the idea that cultural activity and artwork in general was highly focused on nature and the patterns of nature and the connection to nature. So I'll end today's YouTube with a reading of the poem from Li Bo, which is all about nature and also the mystical. So here we go. The rain was over, green covered the land. One last cloudlet melted away in the clear sky. The east wind came home with the spring, bearing blossoms to sprout on the branches. Flowers are fading now, and time will end. All mortal men perceive it, and their sighs are deep. But I will turn to the sacred hills and learn from the Tao and from magic how to fly. Be awesome, YouTubers, and fly.